My name is John Caputo. I am an asset manager in the Akron area, and I first met Tony Viola when I was a freshman in high school. Tony lived across the street from my parents. He had just purchased a house there, and I would actually cut his grass and do odd jobs for him to make a couple extra dollars.
So you were there from the beginning of Tony's real estate career?
Yes, he actually didn't even do real estate full time. He had a full time corporate job at the time.
What kind of real estate agent did you see him being?
Uh, Tony was a real estate agent that he a lot of his properties, instead of trying to compete with the big names in the advertising, he tended to be kind of the more affordable properties, uh, properties that were in the inner ring suburbs, in the city of Cleveland, were kind of more of his niche market. He didn't really try to get into the extremely expensive houses. Where you have to spend a lot of money on advertising and a lot of time kind of uh, going and meeting people and not get the listing, or showing people 800 houses and they decide, no, we're just going to stay in our apartment, we're not going to buy a house now. He really found kind of a niche in the call it $150,000 and less property market in the Cleveland Cuyahoga County area.
And so he was doing business in real estate long before any of these indictments or this news happened, correct?
Oh yes. So Tony started off with where he purchased a couple of rental properties. They were in Cleveland Heights, one of the suburbs of Cleveland, and most of them were two-family houses. And he purchased them. I would actually help him out. We'd paint. He didn't buy houses that needed a lot of work, so we would paint. We would have somebody come in and put carpet in, just kind of dress it up a little bit, and then he would rent it out. And he did that for probably it was 5 or 6 years, and then we kind of thought, you know what? What if we bought a house that was in a little worse shape, needed a little bit more work, and we fixed it up and sold it. So we did. We bought a house. It was actually in East Cleveland, fixed it up, weren't able to sell it, ended up refinancing it and making it a rental property. And so just retained it as a rental property, and did that with a few houses. And then we actually started getting a little bit better at selling them. And so before Tony was a realtor or had his real estate broker's license, as a owner, renovator, and then he would sell the houses himself. So, and this goes back into the early '90s. So well before 15 years before any of the subprime lending in the market, having the issues that it had with the subprime lending.
So how did you learn about Tony's indictment in this case?
Uh, I was actually doing some work on Tony's house, and Carl Monday showed up, and he was waiting for Tony to come out of his house, but he had already gone to work for the day, and so I was trying to call Tony and wasn't getting an answer from him. So probably about lunchtime, I had to go into downtown Cleveland. I stopped by his office and was greeted by a U.S. Marshal, who had me go into a room where they took my cell phone. And there's news cameras sitting outside of the downtown building also. But they took my cell phone and said I had to sit there. It was a secret search warrant, but all this media knew about it well ahead of time, obviously. And they made me sit there until I got a phone call that was a friend who happens to be an attorney. And I said to the marshal that was kind of babysitting us, there was about 5, 6 of us in the room, that, hey, that's my attorney. I got to be able to talk to him. And told him what was going on. And he said, just leave. They can't keep you there. Just leave. So I told the marshal that's what he said. And somebody else walked into the room and said, oh, all of you can go now. Uh, and that was when I found out that he was being indicted.
So, what was your initial reaction to the charges as someone who watched Tony go into this business from the beginning, had a good sense of who he was as a person? Because if he's the person he's alleged to be in these indictments, then he was secretly a very greedy person and extremely indifferent to lives he might be ruining by shepherding them into the financial catastrophe that those caught in the middle of the mortgage crisis were.
So my initial thought was, well, they just indicted because there was tons of indictments associated around this. I mean, it was probably somewhere 30 to 60 indictments that were just kind of related to this. And the initial reaction that I had was, oh, they just indicted a whole bunch of people. They did all these search warrants. When they go through everything, they'll get it figured out and realize that Tony didn't really do any mortgages. Right? Like he didn't. That wasn't what he did. He sold real estate. He was a buyer's or seller's broker. Uh, and so I just kind of thought, it'll sit around for a little bit. It'll just go away. They'll figure it out. And then after a few months, it was pretty obvious when they have a press conference and they were saying that Tony and a gentleman named Yuri were kind of the kingpins of this conspiracy with these mortgages. And I found that interesting because if they're these kingpins, this was happening all over the country. There were, this fraud. Didn't just happen in Cuyahoga County. So if they're the kingpins, these ringleaders, they obviously weren't the only ones that thought of this. I've never heard of another case like this where they made it this large conspiracy indicting, the seller of properties and indicting the real estate agent for the properties. You hear indictments about buyers that submitted false information or mortgage brokers that submitted false information. But I didn't really see a lot of at least media coverage. I mean, I didn't search a lot for it, but I didn't see a lot of media coverage that was talking about sellers and realtors. So I thought that was kind of unique to this case. And the seller and the realtor really don't have anything to do with the mortgage. I mean, they're not the people doing the mortgage. So it seemed kind of strange. And the it wasn't one, they attributed, I believe it was over 40 houses in the indictment for Tony. It was tens of houses, but they weren't all the same mortgage broker, but they caught the same mortgage brokers doing the same thing that weren't related to Tony. So it was just the mortgage brokers were doing it. The atmosphere was just perfect for it. Unless you went to a state like Texas, where Texas doesn't allow 125% loan to value. It's against their state law. But Ohio actually did. There was no you must have so much money down, an 80% loan to value. So there were actually uh, lenders out there that would loan $125,000 on a house that was worth 100, which makes absolutely no sense. Uh, and then you had all these where nothing was verified. So you could write down on a piece of paper, I make a $500,000 a year. No W 2, no bank statement. When I took my mortgage broker's class to get my license, the woman that taught the class actually said they call it a liar's loan. So this was something that industry wide was known that they called these loans liar's loans. Uh,
And my understanding of the charges against Tony is on a very simplified level. They're saying that he and others like him devised a way to trick JP Morgan, that the banks were the ultimate victims of a scheme that they concocted. Whereas, which doesn't square with the truth as I understand it, which is that, if there were people on the street level of Cleveland doing shady things in mortgages, they were honestly following just shady rules that were set up by regulators and the banks.
yeah, so that's very true. So the every one of these and JP Morgan Chase really didn't generally go to mortgage brokers and try to say use our product. It was generally through another party that then sold it to J.P. Morgan Chase later. So there was Long Beach, there was actually National City Bank owned one. They wouldn't call it National City Bank, they called it First Franklin, and that was their subprime lender. And so they would do these crazy loans of no money down, down payment gifts. It was all disclosed. It was all accepted. The banks accepted a down payment gift, which a down payment gift is the seller gives money from the closing to a third party who turns around and gives it to the buyer. So it's basically the seller giving the buyer money. And it was all documented. It was all upfront. Nobody was tricking anybody. They allowed it. Now the seller couldn't give the buyer directly the money, but if you did it through a third party, it was then legal. Now they've since made it illegal. There was actually a law passed saying that you can't do that now. But at this time, it was completely legal. It was widely used across the country. This was not a Cuyahoga County, Cleveland area thing. It was all over the country. So to say that the banks were tricked, the sales folks for Argent and Long Beach, they would come in and tell us. And in fact, in one instance, the rep from Argent told us something that was actually illegal, but told us to do it. So this is the sales guy that's supposed to be, peddling to sell these in the secondary market, and he says, "Oh, we won't do four. We will only do 4 loans. We won't do 7. So bring 4 to us. Take the 3 to another one. Take it to Long Beach instead of Argent, and just close them all within 45 days of each other. And then one lender doesn't know what the other is doing." And I brought that up to the district manager at Transcontinental Lending, and she said, "Absolutely not. That is illegal to do. You cannot do that. That you have a duty to disclose that these other mortgages are happening." But this is what the mortgage representative, what the lender's representative is telling the brokers to do. I don't find that to be a realtor problem. I find that to be a lending industry problem.
And yeah, so the things just kind of fall apart logically on a level of, it's why I asked you is like, what kind of person is Tony, and how did he run his business prior to the subprime mortgage system happening? And if I were going to do a forensic investigation based on the premise that Tony and a lot of other people were erroneously scooped up in this, or maybe even scapegoated, I would wonder, like, well, who came into town right when these lax regulations were out there? Because my strange, unique insight I have into all of the subprime stuff is back in 2006, I worked at a small ad agency in New York, and they got a project making I got an assignment to make this internal presentation for HSBC, and I had to program one of the slides. It had this little dial that what you could pull up and down, and what it had to do is, well, you show that when the person's credit score goes down, the interest rate could go up. And it was a whole like presentation, I think, pitching like, we got to get into this subprime game. At the time, I was just like, all the stuff that I was making for a living then, I wasn't thinking about what it was. I'm like, bank stuff. And so I was a corporate tool, literally, that helped this. And I guess as a journalist, I'm making amends.
So that was why I went and got my mortgage broker's license. I had a full-time job. I was running a high-rise building in Cleveland. And, when folks were talking, the realtors, because I was around Tony's office a lot, I did call it some consulting on houses, looking at violations, doing that. It was, make some extra money. And these folks are telling me how much money there's to be made in the mortgage brokering. So I was like, well, maybe I should get my mortgage broker's license. I know a lot of folks that buy and sell houses. It's probably a good thing for me to do. It doesn't really take quite as much time as real estate. I don't have to go drive somebody around and show them houses. Pretty much everything you can do from an office. You really don't. It's all online. Most of the paperwork and everything at this time was all done through the internet. So scanning some documents and sending them over, it was simple to do. I could do it while still having a full time job. Well, what I found out was if you are not making up documents and doing that, it's not quite as easy as it seems. So I did not make a lot of money as a mortgage broker, but I also didn't forge a bunch of documents. Uh, so that's I guess I kept myself out of jail
And
and didn't make a lot of money. Uh,
so, and the other thing, because I cover police abuse and prosecutorial corruption now with this, and also political corruption and this sort of nexus of that. But one thing that's definitely um, a problem that needs to be looked at, and to understand the history of a lot of things in Cleveland, is to understand the history of shady real estate deals and the intersection of real estate and political power. And I've been looking at Tony's case for a year, and my posture as a journalist is very much like I have not been paying close attention to the local, immediate, close and distant history of the city I'm looking to cover. So I've been very much like I want to learn. And as I think about like I said, the nexus of real estate and political corruption and things like that, well, if again, getting into like working theories of the case, when you're trying to figure out why someone's innocent, they'd be railroaded like this. What was the point of all this? Scapegoating people to protect the banks. I certainly can see an institution, a way corrupt people within our institutions could be doing that. But also on a local level, if there were actual like shady people in here that were the kind of people that set up fraud schemes, the kind of people that are very interested in political influence, greasing, and from what Tony says, he wasn't the kind of guy that was hosting fundraisers to make things happen by getting cozy with politicians.
no,
But those people do exist in real estate around here. And there's a lot of power that is yielded to real estate and developers. So it's not a far-fetched thing for me to think that if political operatives were looking to protect shady mortgage lenders, real estate people that were capitalizing on this, who might be legitimate targets for sweeping up people who were, low-level participants in that crisis, then it sort of makes sense that you have to go after someone who can't flip on other people.
well, and when you look at Cleveland, so National City Bank, one of the now PNC. So one of the issues that National City Bank had was this potential liability from First Franklin, and they had sold all these mortgages off. Well, if they fail in the first year, they have to buy them back. And so U.S. Bank and PNC were both vying for National City, and U.S. Bank backed off because of that liability. It was potentially $1 billion liability, and they did not want to take that on. And PNC took the chance, but it was backed up with federal money also. We had federal money to bail all these banks out that made poor choices, allowed poor underwriting. Part of the underwriting is they're supposed to verify certain things. So the first mortgage I ever got, I was 19 years old. I bought a two-family house, actually from Tony. Bought a two-family house from him. I was renovating houses with Tony, so I was self-employed. And what they made me go through to prove that I actually made the money I made was I had to wait for them to contact the IRS. The IRS had to send them my tax returns so that they knew those were the tax returns that I filed and that I had paid my taxes. The amount of documentation that I had to give, one being young, but the other thing was I was self-employed. And they made me go through, it took, I think, 3 months to finally get a loan approval. Where with these subprime lenders, it was less than 3 days. And somebody's self-employed. They never checked anything. The underwriter is supposed to be looking out for the bank. They work for the bank, right? They're supposed to be looking out for the bank and following the bank's guidelines. And they didn't. They never really followed them. Because everybody in this industry is really paid on commission, right? So why would the gentleman from Argent, why would Frank tell me to do it that way? Well, he wants me to put 4 loans through there. because he gets a commission on that. And so with all these commissions that are tied to these, and the banks not wanting somebody else to be able to loan out that money and sell it in the secondary market, they just went crazy with it. Uh, and really, the people that made a lot of money were mortgage brokers. There's so many ways to make money as a mortgage broker, more so than being a realtor. So a realtor, kind of industry standard, you're somewhere between the 6 and 7%. It gets split if you're the seller and another agent brings in the buyer. With mortgage brokering, there's about 3 or 4 different tiers of fees that you can collect from. So you can collect by doing a variable rate mortgage as opposed to a fixed rate. You can get, they call it points. So you get maybe a percentage point if it's a variable that's on that's based on like T bills. But if it's a variable that's based on LIBOR, which changes much more dramatically and is a higher index anyway, that was a higher. You might get 1.5% as a commission just on that component.
LIBOR, for those who don't know, LIBOR.
Yes,
That's I know it's a institution. What's that stand for
I
again?
have to tell you, I don't actually know what it stands
Yeah,
for.
I know that they set
It's an index.
sort of, yeah, an index. Okay.
Uh, so you could get additional commission depending on which index the rate would adjust on. Uh, if you added to the interest rate, so let's say the interest rate was 6%. Well, if you made it 6 3/4, you could get 2 more% on the commission. There were all these different ways of doing it as a broker where some of these commissions got to 9 and 10% with no split. Yes, brokers getting 10% of the mortgage amount as commission. They were making a lot of money.
And that's the
That,
sort of thing where it seems like it's incentivized, considering that getting lots of mortgages in order to throw into these bundles where they could hide the quality of the loan, which they then traded on, and that the whole house of cards was, built upon that. So,
right. I had one gentleman once say to me, only in America can I have a $10 an hour job, buy a $250,000 house that I've never paid a mortgage payment, and I've lived there for free for 2 years because the foreclosures were all backed up. And the guy said, I've never paid one mortgage payment. There's no way somebody that makes $20,000 a year can afford a $250,000 mortgage. I mean, it's just, and these are the loans the banks were, and that loan had nothing to do with Tony. This was happening everywhere. So to try to say a realtor or a guy selling the house that they're the ones that were, kind of hatch this scheme. Well, so did 50,000 other people across the country because it was happening everywhere. Uh, and really, they always say follow the money, right? Who made the money on these loans? Well, it was the Argents in Long Beach because they're selling it off right away, and it was the mortgage brokers. That's who was making the money on these. So to me, it just doesn't make sense. Why? I mean, just sell a different house or sell a house to somebody else. If you're a realtor and you have the listing, you're pretty much going to get your, at least 3%, 3.5% commission. Uh, and I don't know of Tony ever getting kind of more than that industry standard. Uh, so it just doesn't make sense why he would put himself at risk. It doesn't make sense to me.
so were you called to testify in the case? And if so, can you summarize your testimony?
So I was called to testify in the state case. So there are two different cases, right? There was a federal case, which is where Tony was actually convicted. And then after the federal case, they actually tried him, and it's pretty much the same exact loans. It was I don't understand how you can do it twice like this, but I guess you can. And so then he was tried in state court under state felony charges. And so in the state trial, I was called to testify. I was called to testify basically about a few different things. One of them was kind of how the mortgage, the Argents in the Long Beach, since I had talked to all these reps, kind of how they did things. And so uh, I brought a sheet that we had. We call it a lender's cheat sheet, and it gave all of the crazy loans these lenders would do. No document loan, stated income loans, 125% loan to value, all these crazy things that these lenders would do. And it in the list actually has a category, and there'll be 4 or 5 lenders underneath that category that all will do these type of loans. Uh, so that was one of the things that I was speaking about while in court. Uh, the other was a little bit about Tony. I've known him a very long time. Uh, I don't know Tony to do these type of things. I have myself bought houses from Tony. I don't feel like Tony ever ripped me off. I have seen his transactions. I've never seen an instance where I kind of felt bad or thought Tony was doing something wrong. I never encountered that. I do know that Tony. There was a point in time where somebody had bought a house. They thought that the renovation wasn't as good as it should have been, and I know that Tony cut me a check to help make some of the repairs out of his own company, out of Realty Corporation. I just don't see somebody that's just out to get as most money as possible. Why would you pay for? You're the realtor. It's not even your responsibility. But he didn't want somebody unhappy. He didn't want them upset about it. And it wasn't a ton of money, but it was still money that he didn't have to pay. So I just I don't see where they where they come up with it. It's a realtor's a realtor's the kingpin of this crime. Uh, and then kind of the other that came up during the trial was so during cross examination by the prosecutor. I was a defense witness. Tony called me as a witness. So the prosecutor, I believe I'll probably say his last name wrong, but it was Gregarich, I believe is his last name. So he, I haven't done anything wrong. They never interviewed me. I have a clean background. They didn't catch me doing anything wrong. So they never talked to me. So he tried to say that I did poor work at a house and gave a specific instance. I overcharged somebody and did a terrible job and I just ripped them off. So I don't think of myself that way. I was quite upset about it. I ended up figuring out exactly which house it was. After I was off the stand, it was break for the day. I went to that house and ended up paying the person living there to let me in and take some photos. And I took photos of the very specific work that the prosecutor was talking about, which showed that what he portrayed it as, it was completely different. The job was done correctly. It was perfectly fine, would pass any inspection. And I went back into court, and Tony put me back on the stand. And we put these photos up on these 50-inch TV screens. And the kind of what I summarized from that, though, the kind of reason I think that story is important is, so one of their witnesses, which I think every one of their witnesses was somebody that they caught. They had them red-handed. They were going to jail. This was a way for the people to get time off or not go to jail. And a lot of them didn't even go to jail. They supposedly cooperated, and they got 0 jail time. And it was one of them that, they have to find something to discredit me. So the person makes this up, doesn't think that I'm going to drive to a house and pay a guy to let me go take photos. And they just spewed out whatever the criminals told them without ever verifying anything. They didn't ever check into it. It fit the narrative they wanted, and they ran with it. And that's really kind of how I felt coming out of there after sitting in the courtroom and being asked questions by both Tony and the prosecutor. They just didn't care. They wanted a big headline. They loved the fact that they were on the 6 o'clock news and they had this massive raid and they showed computers being carted out on dollies into U.S. Marshal vans, and it was a great media circus. And then the gentleman from the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office, Caceres, is able to get on TV and say, we are indicting this kingpin of mortgage fraud in the Cleveland area. And once you make that statement, and if you really look into everything and it doesn't go that way, how do you back out of that? How do you undo your news conference? I think they backed themselves into a corner to begin with, and they did whatever it took to make sure that that narrative played out all the way through.
So your primary point of testifying was partially to give character to build up Tony's character to a degree,
Well, and so I was
especially
very involved in a lot
also.
of aspects of Tony's business. I knew a lot about Tony's business. We talked about it a lot. Obviously, we've been friends for many, many years. Even though I was not working directly for him, we would talk business strategy. We would talk marketing strategy, not only for him, but for me also. Helping each other out. And, he, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. I know you can edit it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, I was just getting to like sort of making sure I understand a correct summary of your
Oh, why
statement.
they?
Is like
Yeah,
you
why Tony
got
had me
into.
up there? So because I was involved in some of the strategy and how Tony did business, I could speak to. I don't know Tony to ever do this kind of thing. I could speak to Tony felt or found out that there was a mortgage broker that was doing shady things and told his realtors, "You are not to use this company. We do not want to do business with them. It's not good. They're not treating the customers well. I think he found out that they switched somebody from a fixed rate to a variable rate. They snuck it in on him. Uh, and so he told him that he had a realtor that was out, away from Tony, went and had the person, their buyer, go to that broker. As soon as Tony found out, he sent their license back to the state, said, "You're going to have to find another broker." So, in essence, fired the agent. Said, "You can't do this." And so, if this is his scheme and this is how he's making money, why is he firing a realtor for not following that? These aren't good people to work with. That doesn't look like the guy that's making tons of money off of it. That's the kingpin. He would keep sending them to the same people. He would keep sending them there because if he's making all this money off of it, he wants to keep making the money.
Yeah, if there was like I mean, it would have to be if you're the realtor and you have a scheme or a deal worked up with shady mortgage or lender agents and things like mortgage brokers and lenders, then yeah, I guess the way you'd be making money would be a kickback on those big commissions. So there would be a lot more like, yeah, let's keep working with this guy who
Right.
does that sort of that work.
And by the way, Tony was never accused of taking any kickbacks. It was just that he tricked the banks. So an undisclosed transaction between the broker and the real estate agent would be illegal. That is something they could have indicted him for. That he was never indicted for committing that fraud of not disclosing this relationship between himself and the mortgage broker. Because if that money's going back and forth, it has to be disclosed. So that was never part of the indictment. It was he tricked the banks into making loans that they wouldn't have made, which is just, it's not true. The banks made those loans all the time. So yeah, a lot of my testimony was kind of around that, where I didn't see him do any of those type of things. In fact, I saw him do just the opposite. He fired somebody for not following the directive of use brokers that treat the customers well. And I can think of one specific instance. I think there was one other where he did the same. And Tony's also the guy that he set up a branch of transcontinental lending. Well, it's basically a franchise, and he interviewed. They're out of Florida. He interviewed the CEO of the company and how they do business. And one of the things they do is all of their processors, the people that actually pass the paperwork that is supposed to be from the buyer to the actual lender, whether it be Argent or Long Beach or any of those, PNC, that person is actually in Florida, not in Cleveland. So I don't know that person. Tony doesn't know that person. That person has no benefit to letting something slip through. And he set up those checks and balances. Again, if his scheme is to rip the banks off, why would you set up a franchise with these checks and balances. And this is well before any sort of indictment or anybody was even talking about any of this kind of stuff. Nobody had gotten caught doing anything. Why do you set that up if you're making all your money off of this fraudulent mortgages? It doesn't add up.
Um, is there any other interactions with the prosecutorial team, Dan Caceres or Mark Bennett, that you found noteworthy?
So Mark Bennett, I've never met. He was the federal prosecutor. I never met him. It was a little interesting. I thought it was a little odd. So when Tony was questioning me during the first sets of questions there on the stand, he got done, and so the judge said he wanted to take a break, and so I get down off the witness stand, and as I'm walking by the prosecutor's table, there's Caceres and Gregorich sitting there, and Caceres looks at Gregorich and says, "Hey, you got this, you got this." And Gregorich goes, "Yeah, I got this, I got this." And he's like pumping his fist. And it was like a high school football locker room. I just found that odd that you would get this excited about. Honestly, I didn't think of myself as all that much of a witness. Like I wasn't like some great, like I was going to sit there and say, Tony did it, or here's evidence that Tony didn't do it, or there was no like dramatic testimony from me. And I don't think any was expected, but it was just kind of their air, right? It was like a boys' locker, like there were a bunch of high school kids in a locker room. And in some ways, I feel like they half did it to intimidate me, right? Like they had something, right? I should be worried. They got this. They're gonna break me down, right? It was kind of odd. It was like out of a TV show, right? Like you're watching TV or something. A Few Good Men or something like that, you know.
And did that happen? Just so I'm getting the chronology right, were they saying that before they stepped up and made this accusation about you being shoddy,
Yes.
doing shoddy
This
work?
was before they did their cross examination. So Tony questioned me first. Then there was a break. We came back, and then the prosecutor got to question me.
And yeah, and that's I mean, to me, yeah, that's a really strange thing how like they had this accusation about you. I'm just curious how they ever found that out. I mean, if you went to the person's house to go take a photo of it, I mean, I imagine they would have told you like, oh yeah, someone came around here and asking, and
Well,
like they didn't say you did bad work if they were willing to let you look at it.
so it wasn't the owner. So what happened was I know exactly who told them that. Catherine Clover. At the time I did the work, Catherine Clover or one of her entities owned the house. So I actually did the work for Catherine Clover. Now, at the time, this is years later. So at the time that the trial was occurring, I don't know who owned the house. And that's why I brought my subpoena with me and I talked to this guy at the front door. I don't even know who he was. He's just the guy that answered the door. In fact, the judge asked me that. He said, "Well, who was this person?" I said, "I don't know. It was the guy that answered the door." And I showed him my subpoena and said, "Hey, there's some red posts down in your basement. They came up in this court case. I'd love to take some photos of them." And the guy kind of looked at me puzzled, and I just said, "I'll give you $20 to let me in and take a couple photos. I'll be in and out of here in less than 5 minutes." And I handed a $20 bill to him, and he let me go walk down into the basement and take some photos, which I brought into court, later that day. But it was, this is Catherine Clover, who was one of their witnesses. I'm sure they went to her and said, "Hey, Tony's putting this John guy on the stand. What could she, thinking I would never go to the house, right? It's, he did terrible work for me. Just say he did bad work. That he ripped people off just as bad as Tony did, and they probably didn't expect me to do that.
Yeah, you wouldn't call the bluff or
Yes.
yeah. So rounding, yeah, and so that's really pretty much all you knew about Catherine Clover.
Well, so I've heard a lot of rumors about Catherine Clover.
No, I mean, if you, I'm just want, I don't want to open up that whole door of like what's out there
Yeah.
about her. I want, if you had like, oh, I actually did know her some background prior, because that's a big part of this is trying to figure out or nail down evidence wise any of the theories.
So I will say this that I know for sure about Catherine Clover. So she, for a very short period, did some loans with Transcontinental Lending. I don't know how her relationship with Transcontinental ended, The way TransContinental was set up, you were employees, so they did keep some, confidentiality. I do know that she was abruptly gone, and it was not long after an incident that I knew quite a bit about. Uh, I had a loan going on. Unbeknownst to me, she was also doing a loan for the same person, and I didn't even know that. She was doing a loan for a commercial property, which is a different set of rules. Commercial properties and residential properties do not fall under the same licensing categories. So I had asked her, I said he was bringing something in, he was bringing in some documentation. I was going out of town, I was going to Florida, and I asked her if she would send the file on to processing once the gentleman brought in the piece of paper. And uh, she did. She sent the file in for me. And I believe it was the day I got back from Florida. I get a phone call from the regional manager for Transcontinental Lending that says, uh, we have this document in this loan file and it's fraudulent. This document has been modified. Somebody changed it. I'm like, what are you talking about? And she said, well, there's a mortgage statement in there. She said, and the mortgage statement has two people's names on it. One is a female, and the other one is your customer, this gentleman. She said, but the problem is the loan is not in his name at all. He's not on the loan, and there is no statement with his name on it. And I said, well, that's not what he was bringing in. He was bringing in canceled checks to show that that he had. Well, what I ended up finding out was uh, Catherine Clover is the one who put the name on it. She was putting it in the file she was doing outside of mine and dropped it into my file also so that the files matched. And that she had typed in his name trying to get him credit for his fiance's mortgage history. Uh, that's who Catherine Clover was to me, at least. That she was, somebody that didn't mind committing fraud. And I know she did plead guilty. She pled guilty, but she was also, supposedly tremendous help to the prosecution in helping them understand mortgage fraud.
Okay. Yeah, and I'll go ahead and wade into those waters outside of this.
Yeah.
But so rounding things out, have you been interviewed by any members of the press?
No.
What have you thought of the way the press has covered this story?
So I think the press has completely covered it one-sided, and that's towards the prosecutor side, right? It was a great story when you had these kingpins of mortgage fraud with Yuri and Tony. It's a really cool story for them, right? It's something to actually report. And then when these things don't really kind of pan out, it's not a great story anymore. It's kind of 6-page news at that point. It's not front page. And it's like all the retractions that everybody jokes about, right? Where they're so buried so far in the paper. It's the same kind of thing, I think, where it was really great with showing U.S. Marshals, carrying computers out of the office, and it's this great raid, and it makes for really good video. And well, that the prosecution's theory wasn't all that great. It doesn't make that good a video. I also think, let's face it, the prosecutors had to have told the media that these search warrants, these supposedly secret search warrants that I had to sit in a room with my cell phone taken from me, that, they're so secret. How does every news outlet know about it? Well, it's got to be the prosecutor's office because they're the ones doing the news conference afterwards. It just, I mean, I don't think you have to be a rocket scientist to add one and one on that and come up with, they leaked it out to make sure the cameras were there. And for the news, that's a great story. I don't think that a realtor that was indicted and was found guilty and then he was found not guilty. It's just not a great story for him. And I think that they want to keep the prosecutor's office happy. I'm sure that that search warrant and that indictment wasn't the first time they've been given that kind of heads up. So they want to keep that relationship. I mean, Tony's not going to give them great news over and over and over, but the prosecutor's office can. I mean, I wasn't there. I don't know that happened, but it kind of makes sense to me why it would kind of play out the way it did.
Um, so is I think that's everything I wanted to cover from you. This was an excellent interview, John. I really appreciate it. Um, is there anything else you'd like to say to any press that are finally paying attention or government officials? What do you think should be done about this story?
So from a media standpoint, I don't know how much the media, other than kind of getting the story out there. What really needs to happen is folks like Yost, our Attorney General, he needs to take this seriously and at least investigate it. If these claims are true, then he has a prosecutor in his office that has committed criminal acts. And he needs to check that out. He needs to make sure that the people working for the state of Ohio are doing the right thing, and that it's not all about a prosecutor's wins and losses. It's about the truth. It's about finding out what really happened and making the correct person go to jail. I think there's been enough in this case that the attorney general's office should be looking into this, and seriously looking into it. Not let's walk into the office, ask the guy that would have committed the crime, "Hey, did you do this?" He says no, and that's the end of our investigation. Look at some of these documents, and I think seeing some of those documents that have been put out there, it makes you wonder. And being the state attorney general has much greater power to find information than a Tony or even the news media. They have much more powerful ways to come up with this information. I just don't think anybody's taking it seriously. I mean, you always hear the thing of, well, if you find out that Dan Caceres did all these things wrong, what happens to every conviction the guy's ever had? Well, maybe every one of them should be questioned if he's doing. I can't believe Tony's case is the only case he's done something wrong. Uh, so if he has done something wrong in this case, you do need to go look at his other cases and make sure that there aren't people in jail that shouldn't be there. So that's, what I would like to see happen is the attorney general to take a very serious look at his own employee.